Hey, everybody. Today for you, podcast number 85. Today's podcast is titled, What Needs to Be Awakened Inside of You? Hey, everybody. Today, welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. We are Dr. Pete and Sandy Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network podcast where we flesh out the limitations that are preventing you from reaching your goals and living the life that you are called to lead. And so Sandy and I want to both thank you all for taking time out of your day to listen to the podcast. Yesterday, I was stopped by several people to just let me know how much they appreciated the content that we're putting out, that they're listening to it, they look forward to it. And someone actually said, Susan said to me, "Are you speaking directly to me? Because it just seems like what I've been thinking about is what you're talking about." And I just take that as confirmation that we're doing what we are called to be doing.
Absolutely. It's really encouraging.
Yeah, very encouraged. Thank you, Susan, for sharing that with me yesterday. I know it was like in between a bunch of things happening, and I just really appreciate you stopping me. So love and appreciate you all as listeners. So like, follow, share, subscribe. Thank you. And on with the show. What Needs to Be Awakened in You is the title of this week's podcast. I may have said it wrong on the introduction, but it doesn't matter because that's the title. And let's get some backstory on this. Where did we come up with this?
We had a powerful weekend at our church. We brought in guest speakers were brought in, Rachel and Stephen Mostyn from the United Kingdom, and powerful leaders of churches around the world, and Resurrection Life Fellowship, where we attend, brought them in to share at a women's conference. They also had a small, not really that small, men's group that met, intimate group, and then a leadership group on Sunday afternoon. But incredible inspiration that we drew from for today.
Yeah, it was a very pleasant surprise because I didn't know what to expect, and it's sometimes you just got to show up to places like that, right? Like if you don't really know what it's about, but you just show up, and you just never know what you're going to learn and how you're going to be blessed. But love listening to people from the UK speak. I love that accent. It's so rich.
And a shout out to Joe Wicks. He was persistent, wasn't he, to get you there?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, so we've got a bunch of great points that I think are worth sharing, and I think will help you guys as listeners to take it up a notch, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the very first point is the point of seeing bigger. So what does that mean, seeing bigger?
I think key to that is exposing yourself to things bigger. So different environments, different experiences, different people group. Pete is really good at this, and he has to challenge me to tag along sometimes with him. He'll sign us up for different leadership conferences and networking groups, and it stretches my confidence to attend those things. But I'm learning that it definitely helps me to see bigger of what's possible.
Yeah. I guess I'm a big dreamer, right? So
you are.
I've got a gift of seeing the glass overflowing sometimes. And I've been mentored by lots of different people because I like to grow, I like to learn. But a guy explained something to me one time in terms of golf, right? I don't really golf, but I have golfed. And one of the things that I noticed right away was that I was very good at hitting a drive with a slice. And that's, for those that don't golf, that's like if you're standing, you're right-handed, and you're looking down the fairway, the ball takes off really great, and then it just takes a sharp turn to the right, and it doesn't go where you're trying to hit it. It looks like it's going to go the right way, but then it totally just wings over to the right. And he said one of the best ways to fix a slicer start hooking it. Try to hook the ball and hit it in the opposite direction. He said when you step up there and you try to hit it in the opposite direction, you'll actually probably hit it straight. And it may even still have some slice to it. But what you start to do is you start to feel something different. Your mechanics start to change and you get out of a pattern that you're stuck in. And I think that's one of the biggest points of seeing bigger is you expose yourself to something that is beyond your wildest dreams even possible. And then you see that it is possible because there's somebody already doing this. And you're like, wow, somebody can actually do this. So I'm doing, something that's 10 times less and I think I'm stuck and I'm at my max, but wow, I've just watched you do something way more efficient and 10 times better. I can improve. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement. So I've seen that in a number of different avenues. And I think that all of us can stand to get out of what we think is all we're capable of and all that's possible in our lives to just expose yourself to what is possible. Because you are capable of so much more. I just don't know if we expose ourselves enough to really believe that. Too many of us take on a belief system that we're only insert your occupation, right? I'm only a chiropractor. I'm only a secretary. I'm only a teacher. And you put these limiting constraints on your growth because that's all you see yourself as. And that kind of brings us to point number 2.
Which is to see yourself bigger.
Yeah, to see yourself bigger. And you had a pretty big revelation with that.
Yeah, I was saying to Pete as we were preparing, we had to fill out some paperwork recently and it asked my occupation. And I think I've struggled with that over the years. I've pretty much been a stay-at-home mom since we had kids and I help out at the office. And there were times where I felt like that stay-at-home mom role wasn't worthy of that listing on the occupation blank. And then I would say, oh, I'm a chiropractic office manager from the stuff I did there, because that would be more held higher standard in people's eyes. And without thinking, this last week, I wrote down teacher. I didn't even think about it. I'm a teacher. And it caught me. I was like, oh, where'd that come from? But I'm growing in my confidence and I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher in my house. I'm a teacher in my church. I'm a teacher in my mom circles. So I think for all of us, you could think of that. Like, how do you label yourself, right? And think bigger and find more confidence, because we all influence other people all day long, right?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that happened to me a long time ago. Not a long time ago, but I guess it is getting several years since. But at one point, I felt like in my profession, there was a need to bring people together. So I reached out to every chiropractor that I could in the area and called them from the phone book and invited everybody to dinner, basically, to try to bring a gathering of people together, to organize a gathering of professionals together. And I just saw myself as doing something that was going to be beneficial for the profession. And my peers all of a sudden started to see me in the role of a leader. And I never saw myself as a leader. I thought, who, me? I'm the young guy here. I'm the new guy on the block. I just want to get to know people. But you don't realize that by taking actions, you will start to develop skills that you never knew that you had. And you have you have far more ability inside of you and far more potential inside of you than you see in yourself. And I know that there's so much more in store for you, and you will develop it a lot better and a lot quicker the more you, I guess, see yourself in a bigger light than that. And don't be afraid to do it, I guess. I give you the permission to look at yourself as a leader, as a role model, whatever that might be or look like, or what is of value to you.
I don't know if anybody else out there struggles with staying humble. I guess I've been taught to be humble from a very young age. And that can hinder you in some ways, and it's also a great grounding. So God sees you so much greater than you likely see yourself. And so embracing that is still embracing humility. Like,
Exactly. Like, we're not saying that you need to be this like movie star, look at me, grandiose, I need the spotlight. That's not the point.
No.
The point is that if you have a good heart and you want to help and serve and give and love people, yeah, that's a form of leadership. And it can be, and it is done with great humility. And it will be noticed. It will be noticed, and you will be as an effect given a new title, whatever that may be,
And more responsibility.
and more responsibility, which is also good too. So that brings us to point number 3, and I think this is a responsibility of us now, and that is invest younger. This is something that I remember my brother saying to me, was that I have good hands. And I was just a teenager. And he said, you have really good hands, when it came to putting my hands on people. And that always stuck with me. That
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I find myself saying that to my children, and I say that to other people's children, like, oh, you have a real gift for caring for people and communicating with people. But that's investment. That's an investment that's pouring into somebody. And it's not that I'm trying to get everybody to become a chiropractor in the future, but if you see something in some younger individual, pour into them, give them confidence, speak something positive into their life. They need that more now than ever.
Absolutely. Steve Mostyn gave a great example of that the other night at our leadership time. He said, in the Bible, so many of the leaders that God chose, he chose them when they were teens, like young teens, 13, 14. And he called all the teens up in our church, and they just filled the front. And he just spoke powerful words of life over them. And he said when years ago that was spoken to him to choose to kind of listen to God and see who who pointed out to him a young man in their church. And he did that. And he's been pouring into that young man for 30 years, and he's become a pastor. And so really the power of listening and watching and seeing those around you in the younger generation, and who can you pour into and be consistent. It might be for a shorter time, a year, 10 years, a lifetime. But the impact of that, yeah.
Yeah, the ripple effect of that is unknowing, and it can be infinite. So I love that idea. And it's one thing to pour into your own kids, but to even pour into other young men and women that are in the upcoming ranks, because that is our future.
When he even encouraged us, like as a church body, like say your boards over your businesses and your organizations, if you want to keep going, the younger generation is your future. So having them on your boards, listening to them, getting their input, so powerful. Do we do that? Like, that's so uncommon.
Yeah. But it's so helpful. Yeah, we just brought in, my son into the practice and his wife, and I love their input.
Yeah.
Their input is fresh.
So much energy.
Their input is energetic, and it's I'm receiving it with full acceptance. Like, hey, I don't know your people, not like your people,
right.
so to speak. Yeah, so super cool. All right, that brings us to point number 4, which I think we've actually organized these better than I thought, because that very thing, it dovetails into something that both Sandy and I have struggled with over the years, and that is we've always tried to wear many hats and do many things, and that's a huge limitation. And this goes to what's called the Jethro principle. You want to tell us about the Jethro principle?
Yeah, and I didn't know where it came from. I just looked it up this morning. So it's out of Exodus, and it's Moses was being the judge. He was judging disputes amongst the people. And this younger gentleman, Jethro, came to him and said, "Why are you the one handling all of this?" And he said, "Well, everyone comes to me, and I know God's laws and commandments." And, he was the authority. He was their leader. But Jethro's advice from God was you need to bring up and there's a lot of qualifications of who you bring up, but bring up men of qualification that will handle some of these disputes and still come to you with the ones that they needed more direction with, but bringing up leaders. You want to give the qualifications?
Yeah, well, it was pretty interesting because, leaders don't do what others can do.
Yeah, I wrote that down.
That's a really good point, right? Like true leaders don't do what others can do. And no leader is called or gifted to do everything. And I know that maybe you can do everything. I can do a ton of things. It's unbelievable what I'm capable of. But this is the qualification. He said, choose capable men and appoint them as leaders. So they have to be capable. They have to have skill. How much skill do they need? Well, they don't have to be 100% proficient. They can be 50 to 60% proficient, and you can train and help them to become closer to that 100% proficient. And they must be God-fearing men who can be trusted and not be bribed. So in this case, where Jethro was talking to Moses about this, they were talking about being basically a judge. So yeah, bribery was an issue. So you don't want people that are bribed. But in our case, like, what are the qualifications for somebody that's going to take over some of your responsibility? What are your top values that are non-negotiable? That's where you put that in there. And God-fearing is a really good place to start, right? So yeah, I love this concept because I know that it just frees you up to do more of what you're really good at.
Right. I also loved that as leaders, that's what they do is they go around training up leaders. They said they gave the challenge to find your assistant, if you want to call it that, in the next 2 weeks. Like, I was like, 2 weeks?
Yeah.
But that's awesome because it's going to happen. Right.
Yeah. So putting a timeline on things like that, that's always a success tip right there.
And it takes away the looking for the person that's at 100%. You may not find that in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah. And obviously I've also heard it said that, you want to get the right people in the right seats. So, I look for more trainability when I'm looking for people to help me, rather than like all the qualifications.
Yeah.
Like, are you trainable? Are you open to learn? And is your heart really in the right place? Do you value, or do you have do you share in my vision? You don't have to be at the same level, but do you share in that? So those are a couple of really good.
And I think for me, we can hinder growth in something we've started if we're not willing to pass it on.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we can't keep doing everything.
Yeah, 100%. And then that brings us to what I thought was just an amazing, an encouraging analogy. And it has to do with what's called a pyrophytic plant. A pyrophytic plant. What was the name of the plant? Do you remember?
It was the Australian...
Australian honeysuckle?
Yes.
Yeah, but isn't there another name for it?
Yeah. Banksia?
Banksia plant or something like
Yeah.
that. Anyway, so super cool. Pyro means fire. Phytic is plant. And so it's this fire plant, right? And the areas of Australia, this is where this plant is, and that they burn. And so there you go, fire plant. And the fire is actually necessary because inside this hard cone is a resin, and inside the resin are the seeds for the plant. And these seeds will lay dormant for decades until a fire comes along hot enough to melt the resin. And out of that, the plant will start to grow. Those seeds will be deposited and it'll start to grow. So it literally needs fire for it to reproduce. So the fire is necessary. And this is where we got the title of the podcast, because we will all in life go through times of fire, difficult, hard times. There's so many different options for that, right? I could list them all. And we've gone through some challenging, some difficult, hard times in our own life already. And as much as you don't love it and enjoy it during that time, I'll tell you, some of the worst day and the best day of my life was when my mother died when I was 16. It was an awful, awful, awful day. But out of that, God has made me, shaped me, and allowed me to grow to something I would have never been without that trial at that point in my life.
Right. And there, if we can relate it to the seed, there was a seed in you that couldn't be released until you went through the fire.
Right.
So I think for our listeners and for us, what is it that hasn't been awakened yet in you that is maybe you're avoiding the fire? There's things that happen to us that we have no choice. They come upon us, right? There's fires. But there's also fires that we avoid. Maybe it's too challenging. It makes you too uncomfortable. But you're not awakening that seed that's in you until you step into that fire.
Right. That's very, very well put. Yeah, whatever that might be. So I hope that reaches you in a positive way. I hope you see that as an encouragement to lean into something that maybe you are avoiding, and also to just be aware that if and when the next fire comes, to have some peace and knowing that there is a seed that is going to be released because of that. And down the road, that seed will take root if it falls in fertile ground. So we pray that over all of you as you listen to this podcast. So, that's anything else you want to add?
Just a really good point, Pete, not to lose hope because that seed is there.
Yeah, great. Yeah, stay hopeful for sure. All right, that's all we have for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. Be sure to tune in each and every week so you can stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. And we will see you back next week.
Music playing. Have a great week.